Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Brands Podcast. I'm your host, Bash Marino. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in. Wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast, I appreciate all the love and support. Gracias a todos por su apoyo. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms, on Instagram, Facebook, aka Meta, and Twitter, aka X now. So hit, and of course, hit that red subscribe button on the YouTube. Follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Working Rants Podcast. That's all one word. Follow the podcast on Twitter, aka X, or whatever Elon decides to call it by the time this episode airs. At Social Work Rants, and hit the like button, type in the Social Work Rants Podcast on Facebook, aka Meta, and of course, like, share videos, whatever. A lot of dope, incredible social workers that have had the pleasure of interviewing, even just thinking outside the box. So whatever episodes resonate with you, by all means, share. Uh, Podcast episodes, rate the podcast, hit the like button on the videos. So that really helps out with everything on the YouTube channel. So again, thanks so much for rocking with the podcast. We got a special treat. Shout out. Um, Before I get into my guests, I did want to do a disclaimer. This podcast is not intended to be used for uh, as a substitute for therapy. This is for educational and or entertainment purposes only. If you need of assistance here in America, call 988, call 911, call your therapist, call your psychiatrist if you have one. If you don't, go to your nearest emergency room. For my out of the country listeners, whatever your emergency contact number is, by all means, reach out and contact and get some help that you need. It's okay not to be okay, but definitely get the help that you need. So I want to get that disclaimer out the way. And now my guests at this time come all the way from Australia. Shout out to the 2% listeners, viewers that that listen to the podcast all the way on the other side of the world. Shannon Swales, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm great, Baz. How are you?
Good, I'm doing great. What time in the morning or are you in? As this
Yeah.
recording is Sunday evening, my time.
It's Monday morning, so it's that start of the work week for me. But this is a lovely way to start to have a chat with you. And shout out to those 2% Australian listeners too, and the 98% American.
Yeah, European listeners and of course the American listeners. So and throughout the throughout the world, I got people listening all over
Nice.
the world.
Oh, lovely. Sorry, everyone.
So wherever you listen or watch, thank you so much. Want to shout out to Australia and New Zealand. They hosting the Women's World Cup going on, doing a great job hosting. And I like the fact that is it kind of cold over there? Because I see some coaches with some bubble jackets, and I'm
Yeah.
jealous because I don't like the heat. So I'll go
Oh,
over there for a couple weeks.
I yes, it is cold here at the moment, but I live in Queensland, so we don't really get much of a winter, but just enough to put a jumper on. Yes, but definitely in the south, in more of the Victoria, Melbourne, Sydney, New Zealand, definitely they'd be really cold. Yeah, right now. Yeah, we're warmer up here in Queensland.
Oh, nice. So
Mm.
I'm gonna have to get some money together and go down there.
Yeah, stay in Queensland, but not in summer. Don't come here in summer. It's
No, I
terrible.
won't.
It's hot.
No, I would go there in the winter,
Yes,
or
yes. You'll be fine. You'll
or
be
your
out
fall.
swimming. Oh, yeah, that'd be nice. And spring. Yeah, spring, fall, winter. Perfect for Queensland weather. Yeah. Mm.
Awesome, because it's been like in the 90s and in the 80s, humid. Even though I'm better
Oh,
compared to like
mm.
Arizona or Texas is like 100, So
Oh, terrible heat. That's because that equals about because we're Celsius, I think
right,
around the high 30s, 40s. Yeah, it sounds really, yeah, really hot. Yeah. It's
yeah.
lovely. Mm.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
let people know who you are, what you do now. Wonderful
Yeah.
field of social work, mental health.
Yeah, so my qualifications, I suppose, I'm in Australia here, a clinical psychologist, which I think is when I've looked into a little bit different in terms of the road to becoming qualified psychologist in America is, I believe, a lot harder than what it is in Australia. Like our standards are pretty high, but just to, I suppose, give a little bit of cross section, I suppose, in America, I think there's a little bit more training than what we get here to become a psychologist, but it's still 6 years full time university work to get there. I got my qualifications, I suppose my learners or my student psychology back in 2008. So I've been basically, or even before then, practicing as a counselor and case manager. So I've been in the mental health field for some time, but as a psychologist since 2008, and I got fully qualified in 2013. So I've been mostly practicing in that time in here in Australia, they call it private practice. So
Okay.
clinics, so like a doctor clinic, I suppose, but I'm not sure over in America what that looks like, but a clinic here in Australia where you've got psychologists, so group practice,
Okay.
and our government, where you probably heard of our Medicare system.
Yes.
We have quite good healthcare here, and in Australia, if you want to see a psychologist and you have a mental health condition, you can go see a doctor and they give you a referral to a psych, and you get 10 sessions per calendar year to you get a rebate. It's not fully comped, it's not fully supported, but you get a really good large rebate. So I've seen a lot of people on those, what they call mental health care plans. And so it's a lot of depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosocial issues like relationship difficulties, stresses, divorce, separation, parenting, domestic violence, just workplace stresses, workplace injuries, pain management, a lot of cross section I was doing. So that's, and I've always been interested. I suppose I got into the field because I just was very curious about human behavior and understanding it, and I just loved learning about it. When I was at uni, I really was like, this is really interesting. I'm really getting to know why we tick. And then I just really ended up, I wanted to help other people really, and help them with the tools and strategies that might help them understand themselves better and be able to operate in this world. So that's how I kind of got into things. But yeah, that's suppose my professional background. But I wasn't always a psych. I did things before I went into psychology, like worked in hospitality and retail and a bit of administration work and things like that before I discovered and explored psychology. Yeah, in my 20s.
Cool.
Yeah.
How was that transition like? So like for me, like I wasn't like I wanted to do sports broadcasting and kind of went through what they have was at the time those temporary agencies. These agencies help you find jobs if you're like unemployed or trying to like transition for work, and then it became a foster care agency. Was my first experience into social work. So like I need a job, like I have no money. Like
Yeah.
yes, I'll take the job.
Yeah.
So how was that
Yeah.
transition from you doing hospitality work and like what
Yeah.
made what was the switch
Yeah.
into
Good
psychology
question.
for you?
Yeah. Well, I was working as a manager, well, shift manager, at a popular coffee place still here in Australia. And I was just bored. I didn't like, actually, I was quite annoyed with hospitality. I was really pissed at the time, just with customers. I mean, I loved the customer service, but it was one of my customers who was, she was in her lovely regular customer, came in with her husband regularly, and she was in her 50s, I'm assuming that, or maybe 40s or 50s at the time. And she was studying psychology, and she was just really easy to talk to, and she started chatting to me about it. And I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was I wouldn't say probably a little bit lost, because the people I grew up around and sort of my siblings and stuff, it was sort of expected for you to know what you wanted to do. There was this culture of you should know what you wanted to do, but I had no freaking idea. I realize now there's a lot of us out there have no clue, and that's okay. This early life is, I think life is about exploring, but I didn't know that back then. Anyway, she got chatting about the psychology stuff she was learning, and I was just really interested. I was very curious, and I had to work up the courage because I wasn't, I felt anxious about going to study university. And so even though I was actually quite good at school, like I had done well at school, I just didn't feel like I was able to study university level, which I think is called college level in America. And so it took a bit of a a bit of courage to jump in. But once I did, and I stayed working in the retail field, like moved to retail to support financially to go through uni. But again, we're lucky here in Australia. Not sure what it's like over in America, but it was very easy to get retail and hospitality jobs back there in the early 2000s, and they pay pretty well, even though they're entry-level jobs. We have good base wages here. So I could do that. And I also got government assistance. So it really allowed me to explore and go to university. We are in a lucky, I realize we're in a very privileged country in that way. And you can defer your payments in uni, and pay it later. And so it's I suppose the only difficult transition was my anxiety and taking that plunge. Everything else I was set up, and I could go back and live with my parents. I had a family support to be able to live at home, pay really small board to them, and study and work casually in my retail job.
No, that's really good. It's interesting that is some of the similarities, and definitely hear some of the differences compared to just living in general and here in America compared to you're telling your story. It's just here, just different things. It's I think now it was a little bit easier back then to like there's waves. There's like waves, or like, okay, we're after like, when I first started social work, I literally coming off like the heels of 9/11, living in New York, and still like the aftermath of that. And then we had like a big like 2 months after that was like a big plane crash that killed a lot of people. Just it was like an accident. It wasn't anything terroristic or anything, but still like something to do with a plane. And it was like, okay, let's like kind of like dealing with that. And then so like a couple months after that was like how I got into the field, and it's like and just didn't just just a baby that have no idea what the heck I was doing. No formal training. It was like, this is what you got to do, and you do it. And so it's like, and then really not a livable wage to start working. So I did what I could. Like luckily, like I have my parents too, so like just helping me out and kind of figure out my way to like, do I still want to do this or not. And the rest is pretty much history after that. But
I hear that it sounds like you came into that baptism of fire, I think we call that, like like in a town or in a city where there was so much tragedy had and everyone grieving, everyone suffering, and then to be a new social worker without the training. And I know this doesn't definitely like totally different. I didn't have any of that sort of systemic pain and suffering when I went got on my training wheels and going out. Like at the time, things were pretty. It was like 2008, so things were okay here and settled. There was no big traumas around, but that lack of training, like what like we often talk about here in psychology in Australia, they're just we've got pretty good training, but not that really on the job supporting, kind of supervising, observing, really helping you out in those first few years that are like huge. And, you know, when you're working with people who are traumatized, are depressed, are anxious, you know, really suffering, amongst other things, you know, there's so many other things that, wow, yeah, like, and I didn't have the systemic things, you know, dealing with. It was just more the lack of training. There definitely needs to be more of that. I think there'd be less mental health suffering amongst the actual workers
Yes.
if we had that support network around us of the industry to support us, especially in times like that where a city is suffering, a nation is suffering. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds very, very similar because, yeah, we're still dealing with like the lack of, proper supervision, especially in a nonprofit profit sector. And it's like, okay, you're here, you work. Sometimes it's all about numbers, like meeting quotas and stuff like that. So it's a lot. So you mentioned 2008, and then that became here in America like the Great Recession. So like
yes, 2008, 2009. Hey, yeah.
yeah. So during those dreaded Bush years, which so it was like dealing with that and kind of seeing how that affected social work with a lot from what I saw at the time was a lot of like foster care, aftercare services with kids already like going back home with their parents after being in foster care, and like those agencies being forced to close, and a lot of like shifting and layoffs happening. Which related to the field and everything else that was happening in terms of financial sectors and stuff like that. So, but just focusing on the social work aspect, just like agencies closing or like layoffs happening. So, and that's just in New York. That I don't even know what the rest of the country was going through. So,
that's terrible. When you like working as a helping professional, you're there to want to help and support them, and then for that service to be taken away because of the funding, and then these vulnerable children going back into homes that, and the parents, I'm not sure, the systems that are there to help support them and everyone to be well and okay, and it just got taken away. That's it's not obviously exactly the same, but we had sort of a similar situation here. That mental health therapy plan I mentioned earlier, during the COVID period, our government funded 10 extra sessions per calendar year. So people got 20 sessions, which was fabulous and great and awesome. But in December of last year, they took it away. And whilst we still have 10 sessions and better than zero, and definitely a lot of people are very grateful, including the people who use it. At the same time, the people like 10 sessions is never enough anyway for a lot of the people that we're seeing, and 20 was just starting to really help support some development and progress for a lot of people, and they're needing ongoing, and that's just created we're just really we're really capturing what that's actually caused in the last 6 months with these sessions being taken away from people. But yeah, when you take services away, hey, like it's just much needed services in our community, it has a ripple effect, and it just makes things worse, and yeah, it's not great.
So what was there like and I'm going to get to COVID, so it was like a perfect segue, but was that like Australia's version of was there like a federal policy that was put in place, like additional government assistance because of COVID, or like why was those 10 extra sessions given to the people?
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, I don't know the policy as such, but it would have come from in Australia. Our health policies are mostly state run, but also federal does come into play as well. I'm not very good with the political stuff, but yes, it was a government decision, and often it's the mental health services who are advocating to government people, representatives, to put these things into place to support. So yes, they were actually quite great. They responded quite quickly, because I was still working before I became ill. I was still working in the first year of COVID, so 2020. And I think it was within a few months of it, sort of March, it's really started kicking up here in Australia. Sort of March became aware of it, and I think our first lockdown was in April or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But the government came in quite quickly with increasing the sessions. And I think it was because it was easier probably policy-wise because it already existed. Mental health care plans already existed. We already had that infrastructure, if you want to call it. It was mostly just passing that 10 extra, and it was a temporary, like they always considered it to be temporary. And every, I think, 6 months or a year, they looked at renewing it, and they did keep it going for 2 years, I think, or no, 3. It was 2022 when they stopped it and pulled it back to 10. But yeah, it was a government decision, definitely, but it would have been pushed by the leading bodies of mental health professionals here in Australia to get that, because they're often advocating for the public's needs around mental health and letting the government know what is needed.
Right.
Yeah. They don't always listen, but sometimes they do.
So it's funny. Another like kind of similarity, but for us had to do with insurance that I've been talking about a lot recently. Our kind of like our state funded insurance is called Medicaid, and so the last like 2.5 years, almost 3 years since COVID, everyone who had the government run insurance Medicaid was automatically renewed because you have to like renew it every year. So the last like 2.5, 3 years, it was automatically renewed, and now as of April 1st of this year, so this past April, the government decided like no, you have to renew those services. We're not automatically going to renew it. So as a result, that during the last couple of years, a lot of people were like over income for this service, so they're getting this insurance, and now there's a lot of people who have to renew, and there's a lot of people already, and that a lot of people that's their main source of insurance. So a lot of people got discontinued for a variety of different reasons, and the government has done a terrible job explaining that you have to like renew, and it's like more like a federal level and also like the local level as well. So
So it
so
sounds
yeah,
like
so that's
it
what
sounds like
like I'm dealing with now.
Baz, it sounds like so your Medicaid, that government funded, but having to apply for it now, you can't just, it doesn't automatically renew. It sounds like that's our Medicare, like, because it's a public funded, government run, I suppose, insurance. I suppose we don't call it insurance, we just call it the public funding. And then there's private insurance, and I do see clients who see me who claim a private rebate, but they're paying those premiums each quarter to fund that service. But everyone, regardless of their income, gets Medicare, whereas it sounds like in America Medicaid is the public, but it's like depends on your income.
Depends on the income, yes. And then we have what's called Medicare, then that's for generally like 55 and older, like it's for seniors, and there's people younger than 55 who can't qualify if they have like some sort of a disability. And then there's private insurance through different insurance companies. And then when Obama was president, he came up with affectionately known as Obamacare, but it was the Affordable Care Act. So it kind of for those people who are just over the income level for Medicaid, so they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they still make too little to get a private insurance. So it's still kind of private insurance, but you just apply for it. So that's like the stopgap between.
I was gonna say trying to help with that gap.
So it's like that's actually pretty good. It was a pain in the. It's still kind of a pain in the butt to apply for it because like everything else in terms of insurance. But that's been like the big stopgap for a lot of people, and I'm dealing with that now with a lot of my current clients that I work with.
It does. It's just one thing that makes it so much more harder for our clients to access the services that they need. And then as the professional trying to provide it too, like wanting to help this person out, but then financially they can't afford it and your hands are tied. It's very stressful. It's very, very heart wrenching too at times. Yeah. And imagining you're like, I again realize our services, although no such thing as perfect, but that they've got some areas to improve. I do realize it's a fairly a system that I think almost covers everything, but there's still a lot of gaps and areas that we're needing to work on too. And as a professional, it's sad when there's people fall through the gaps. It's not okay.
So talking about COVID, how was COVID in Australia?
Yeah, well, I think I'm not sure actually what the media would have portrayed over there, but I think I did hear some stuff from. I've got my in-laws. There's a few cousins, my husband's cousins who live in America. So I heard a little bit here and there, like that we're unfairly locked down or something in jail. But here in Australia, especially in Queensland, we fared quite well. Our neighbouring states didn't fare very well. Victoria, particularly, they were in lockdowns for quite a long time due to the rates of spreading down there. But in Queensland, we were quite lucky. So I think we had a couple of lockdowns. I mean, we were locked into our state, but we could still travel around. Whereas in Victoria, it was a lot of staying in your home and not being able to move, and a lot of rules and regulations around where you could go. And I've got family down in Melbourne as well. So it was pretty hard for them. And for me and for, I suppose, Queensland, we fared pretty well. And it was almost like business as usual, except you just couldn't do your international trips or your domestic trips. But for Queenslanders who had family interstate, that was really hard, working with some of the clients being cut off from their family. So even though they were able to move around Brisbane, not being able to see their family, whether it be siblings, mother, father, that kind of thing, was hard. But with clients, all there, like, because I was still working at that time, I was already, like, I had full books already and I wasn't seeing new clients. We were already stretched thin as a profession in psychology. But what we noticed, of course, the needs of our current clients went up. Even though we fared well, people were anxious, people were worried, people were stressed, what's going to happen. It was an uncertain world now. So, but then we had new clients wanting to access the service. And I saw it. I'm a warrior. I'm working on it. I tend to think about the future. And I was like, as soon as I heard that COVID was hitting and all this was happening, I was like, excuse my French, but I'm like, we're screwed. Like, as a profession, we don't have the services available. We don't have the number of social workers, psychologists, counselors that we need to really help. And this is going to be effects for long after. We're still seeing the effects now. And we have a shortage in our profession. We don't have enough people trained to be able to help. And people, there's long wait lists. So there's a I suppose, and the profession itself is burning out as well, as you've talked about on a pod as well. Like, so we see professionals leaving the profession, and not just mental health professionals, our doctors, our nurses, they're all burning out. And then from all of this, so even though we fared well as a country, what we do see in our media, and this is, I was saying to you earlier off air that I'm someone who doesn't trust the media, but one of the things that the media was saying and is saying now, we're dealing with the aftermath, the pandemic, the mental health pandemic, that COVID has left, and we don't have the resources to cope with that. We're doing our best, of course, but I certainly felt that pressure already in the early stages, because you can't, like, sort of 6 months into COVID, you knew this wasn't going to go away very quickly, and this was catastrophic, and people all over the world were suffering. So anyway, don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. And what do you see that as like a barrier in terms of meeting the need of not having like enough qualified psychologists, mental health professionals in Australia to meet that need? Because the main barrier Here is we have to take a licensing exam that
Okay. Yeah.
and if you don't pass it, then you don't get licensed, and a lot of the jobs here require getting licensed. So it's like, okay, and it's like a lot of cultural bias within the test. So it's like, okay, so that's been like the main barrier in terms of why there's not enough licensed professionals, and then even like geared to. So once you get one license, in many jobs you got to get a second license like 3 years later. So and then you have to pay to pay that exam as well. So and that's to even do more like therapeutic work. A lot of times involving doing therapeutic work. So like what barriers are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, Baz, they only just for psychology, separate to social work, because I don't know as much about their procedures in terms of training as I do psychology. So yeah, I don't want to get it wrong. Any social workers out there in Australia, they'll be able to answer their training, but I do know they need to, certainly. I don't know how many years at university, and then they definitely have to well, certain jobs they need to be registered. I don't think they have to go through an exam. They may do to become registered. But I don't think they have to be registered to practice. But often the jobs and the work and or actually earn a living, they do need to get registered to actually get that work. Like that mental health therapy plan I mentioned, you have to be a mental health social worker. So that's like in terms of training, I don't know how many years that is, but then they do have to get registered. So they've got to jump through those hoops to be able to get that work. And that's the main kind of body of work that, you can earn an income from, and a steady income. But there's obviously other areas, NGOs, you can work in hospitals and things like that. Anyway, not quite sure exactly what they need to go through, but in psychology, they did introduce an exam for registration to go from provisional student psychologist so in training psychologist to fully registered. Not sure, because I didn't have to do the exam. I got through before, yay. But I'm sure there's I'd imagine there'd be some issues with the exam as well. And I think they do have to pay for it. But what I do know is one of the reasons why we have a shortage, at least in psychology, is that there's only so many placements at university to do the postgraduate part of your training. Like when I went through, there was 16 places in the university I went to, and we have quite a few universities around Australia, but I don't know how many, but that's not enough. And so there's not enough funding going to training of psychs, and pretty much they're not accepting, like there used to be this other pathway where you did 4 years of university and then sort of went out and done on the job training and got your qualifications through that way. They're pretty much phasing out that option. So you have to go and do postgraduate studies. So that financially puts a lot of people out, to actually afford to go and do postgraduate studies. And again, we do get government assistance, but it's you can't really work when you're doing postgraduate studies, or if you do, it's casual, and not many people can afford to. So it wipes out a lot of people that would be fabulous at this job, and there's only 16 placements at one university. It's just a huge issue that they're trying to target now and really advocate is for more spots in universities and more support, to financial support, to get people who are really got great strengths to be able to do that. So I don't know, like, what do you call those? Not sponsorship, scholarships and things like that, to help, because most people, there isn't really scholarships. And so it's just personal funding. So, it wipes out a huge amount of people. It'd be great, just based on your income. Yeah. And support networks.
Now, I like that there's this advocacy of scholarships available for people to try to get into the program in order to do the work, because there has to be some sort of
That's one of the ideas. I don't think that exists yet.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure. I think there is, if you're doing a PhD, so research-based, yeah. But if you're going that route of wanting to become a clinician and, you know, be in that forefront and treating people and groups and, you know, families and stuff, no, it wasn't when I went through. But I think that's one of the solutions they're looking at, as well as increasing placements. And I'm not sure in the social work world and in our counsellor world, things are different there because they're not a regulated industry here in Australia in terms of like there are actually a couple of registration bodies who have got certain standards for you to be registered with them as a counsellor, but generally you can call yourself a counsellor here and only have done, let's say, 2 weeks training or something like that, whereas you've got some counsellors who've done master's level education, lots of training. They've got, they're registered with one of the bodies and they're really great at what they do, and really experienced, but it's still an unregulated profession here in Australia. So not as many like standards to ensure the safety of what they're doing. But there's some really great counsellors, really well trained. So don't want to put down any counsellors out there because like I think it's just, I suppose, doing the homework as a client and sort of, okay, what's the background and training of this profession? And,
right. So sounds like there's a little bit of an issue or a potential issue of what we call in the social work profession here, title protection. So
yes, title protection, because with social work, do you go in America, are you having to be registered with a body, because you said you have to do an exam to be licensed?
So like we go to what was graduate school and have a specific degree in social work. So if you have a specific social work degree, the letters or MSW, then you can call yourself a social worker. However, we have many people who do like mental health work and just like counseling work, and they might be doing it for years, and then the role might be social workers, but they have the experience to do the role, but technically they're not called social workers because they don't have the degree, but they want to call themselves social workers. And then, so that's like kind of like the whole back and forth of like, and so who calls themselves a social worker. And now I recently saw like a back and forth on either Instagram or Twitter about like if you're not licensed, you can't call yourself a social worker, and compared with it's like a lot of nonsense that's going on within the profession. Is like I always call it the Civil War of the profession is like brewing in America.
We've got one within psychology between clinical psychologists, as I mentioned. That's and it's like here in Australia, we all get our if you become a psychologist, it's a regulated industry, so it's a protected title. So if you don't have the training and you're calling yourself psychologist, you can be in a lot of big trouble in Australia. But there's these different, I suppose, titles within psychology. There's clinical psychologist and there's psychologist, almost like a general practitioner of psychology, I call it. But in the, that mental health care plan I mentioned from our Medicare system, they give a larger rebate for clinical psychologists over psychologists. And I'm saying this, like, even though I see us as equals, all psychologists are equals and social workers and everything, we've got obviously different levels of experience and training and all of that makes us unique. And but like in terms of payment and stuff, I think it should all be the same. But here in Australia, Medicare, the government gives a lower rebate if you see a registered psych over a clinical psych. And there's really not, well, I don't think, many reasons why that should happen, because clinical psychology training's only been around for about 10 years or so, roughly, whereas registered psychology training's been around for ages. So there's some really great, well-trained, very experienced registered psychs, but they can only get a lower amount of rebate for those sessions. And so there's a civil war in I think it's pretty much full blown. I'm not one to I haven't got into that war. I certainly advocate for equality and equity between the different tiers, and but yeah, it's just it still exists, the differences, unfortunately. And yeah, there's a lot of disgruntled, understandably registered psychs in Australia. So yeah, we've got a war as well. Not great, but yeah, hopefully not for long.
Gotcha. What's like what else do you have going on in terms of like the rest of 2023 and
Yeah.
beyond?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll rewind a little bit just to explain the 2023 or the 22 to 23, because it'll make more sense. So as I mentioned, like during that COVID time, which
Yeah.
very tough for professions, and I'd imagine over in America, really tough with what obviously COVID and lots of other things. But I actually left the profession in it was February 21, 25th of February 21. I was so sick, so unwell. I was just, absolute mental breakdown, and unable to work. And through my therapy, and I went and saw my own psychologist and getting help, it was burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, as we chatted about before we started. And so I wasn't sure I'd go back to the field. I actually thought I chose the wrong profession, and that I wasn't capable or able to do the work anymore or ever. I truly felt like I just wasn't built for it. Like I couldn't hack it was my mental thinking then. But I promised myself fairly early on when I crashed to just take a year off from that work, not to go back to counseling, being in front of clients, till I could really, I suppose, feel like, or if I felt like I wanted to go back, that was well enough, because I saw the harm that, me leaving so abruptly because I was so sick, the effect that had on clients when transitioning to see someone else. And because I was so sick, other people were my colleagues were helping do that I thought, well, I've got an ethical responsibility to be well, and I shouldn't be in front of people till I'm well enough if I go back. So anyway, I spent a year getting better, basically going to therapy, working part-time as a teacher. I was lucky enough to get a job lecturing and teaching other counselors, which I felt I could do. Like I took 4 months off first, and then I got a job part-time doing that. So yeah, so for about, like, I suppose that 2021 to about October 2022, I was really just focusing on health and well-being and working part-time, tightening the purse strings because I didn't have much money to, it was a bit of but I was lucky to have a job and certainly be able to, and the support of my husband. So, still had a roof over my head and food my belly, and a job to go to. So yeah, so that 18 months, because it did morph out to more than a year. But then it was October last year that I actually felt passionate again about working in the mental health field. Like I actually felt like, no, I am meant to be here. I do love being able to share and provide knowledge or ideas or skills, or help people connect with their health and well-being. And so I was like, no, I want to stay in this field. And so I'd already been doing my podcast when I started that while I was burnt out, and so I was like, okay, well, I can continue doing my podcast. I don't have to work like I used to. So I just started building this way of working in the mental health field that I feel is more, well, so far aligned with my health and well-being, and that I can still do good work, but also be well enough to do that. So I've just slowly built up my burnout psychology business, basically my telehealth business, and which involves a lot of things. It involves me doing the podcast. It involves me working one-on-one with clients, telehealth, group work. I love group work. I have a group program that I'm running at the moment with a bunch of individuals who are going through burnout, and supporting them and them supporting each other, which is really great. I love group work, and love the podcast. I love doing what you're doing, but just being able to talk to guests and hear their stories of burnout or hear their wisdom of, so the listeners can benefit. And I'm also writing as well. I love to write. So I'm almost finished and ready to publish my memoir of my burnout experience in hope that
Oh,
it helps
nice.
someone. Yeah. So I'm just doing bits and pieces of all that. And basically the world's my oyster in the sense of what I mean by that is I'm just staying open to experiences in that mental health field. I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2024. I mean, hopefully more of this or just the same of this. But if something else, takes my fancy and I kind of go, oh, that seems interesting, I'll go over and do that, I will. But it'll be in the mental health field. Like I do feel this is the space, and just what that looks like might definitely change and vary and evolve, but it's in the burnout space at the moment. I do focus in that area. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So hopefully that answers your question. Where I'm
No,
at in 2023.
no, I like that. I like the fact that number one, you had the support. You mentioned your husband, and I know with marriages or just not only just marriages but just with family and stuff like that, having that support, like, hey, like I can't do this
Yeah.
anymore. Like I'm burned out. I'm gonna like stop working, and a lot of people will be like, how you gonna pay
Yeah.
bills? What you gonna do?
Yeah.
Like all this
Yeah.
stuff instead of
Yeah.
not being positive. Like, hey, I'm literally like getting sick. Like the job that I'm doing, the work I'm doing is making me like physically ill. That I need to stop doing what I'm doing and get help where I need. And for you to realize that, okay, I can't do this anymore. Let me go get some help. And so
Yeah.
just a lot with that, like not a lot of people have that support or people. I think nowadays I think kind of COVID kind of helped people be like before COVID, like people like gonna work until like they literally physically can't work no more, and then
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
COVID's like the heck I'm doing. I'm like I'm not gonna kill myself working
Yes, definitely.
and doing that.
Mm.
So I'm
Yeah, it
glad you
has
like
taught
you
us
did that for
something.
you. You did that for
Yeah.
yourself. And what's the podcast about?
Oh, so the podcast called is When Burnout Becomes Reality. It's had a few changes of names actually. I first called it Burnout, a different kind of gap year, because you know how I said I chose to have 12 months away from working as a psychologist in front of clients. I called it my different kind of gap year because as a teenager coming out of
Mm,
school, I wanted to take a year off between that and what you call college there.
mm,
Um, and my parents they financially couldn't because they were supporting living arrangements for us kids going to uni, and they couldn't afford me to take a year off. I mean, I would have funded my own year off, but anyway, they really encouraged me to go straight to uni. But I ended up flunking out and failing out and getting really sick. I became depressed at that time. And I so yeah, I was like, this is my gap year. But it was with a difference because it wasn't what I envisioned as a teenager, which would have been travel and
mm,
working. This was basically therapy and getting better.
mm,
And literally just those first 4 months, I mean, most of the things that I could do was literally walk my dogs, if that, I mean, I was pretty good at that. So I was already in that habit. I literally what I could possibly do every day was walk them, go to the gym, which I was in a routine of, and that's all that I really did for a few months, and go to therapy, see my psychologist, and hang out with friends and family where I could muster the energy. But yeah, I feel like I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, but yeah, it was a different kind of gap year. But the
mm,
podcast has just evolved in name, but it's still the same in terms of I started off with, I just wanted to hear other people's stories. And I wanted them to have the opportunity to share if they felt ready to do so about their burnout experience. And
mm,
as you'd know, Baz, it's not ever just burnout, right? There's other stuff going on. A lot of people I've spoken to, there's grief, or there's marriage breakdown, there's like just financial stress, there's so
mm,
much else going on in their world, besides the stresses at work. It's at home as well, and just even past stuff as well coming in. So I just really, I'm in awe in anyone who shares their story, and just hearing it, I got so much out of it. And then they often would say that they got a lot out of sharing it. Like they felt like it was meaningful and purposeful for them. And anyway, so the podcast is about lived experience of that. but I've also added talking to guests who work in the area or have something to share about how something that might help someone going through burnout. So recently I had a good friend of mine, Dr. Hayley Quinn, and she works in compassion focused therapy. So she came on and spoke about how compassion could help with burnout and unpacked that. So it's just things like that. So it's really a conversation around burnout.
I like that because it's so needed.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I love interviewing. I love just having a chat and learning. So yeah, I get a lot of pleasure out of doing the pod. If I could do that all the time, I'd be like happy woman. Yeah. But it doesn't pay the bills. But it's a lot of fun.
No, absolutely, and just like the podcast you mentioned evolved. The podcast has definitely evolved in the last 3 years, and connecting with different people, and like literally now like all over the world, and then like meeting people who I've had on podcasts is like, oh snap, like we're meeting in person, and it's like we don't gotta be dealing with COVID or I mean it's still a thing, and it's like but it's not like 2020 2021 or early 2022, but still like just safely and like ask like you want a handshake, you want a hug, having like that,
still checking
that permission and do that and doing all that stuff. So it's definitely fascinating how it's been evolved and kind of been therapeutic. So it's definitely been like a journey. So
yeah. So you've been doing it for 3 years, did you say, your pod?
Yes.
Yeah. Mine's it was July 2021, yeah, that I started. So yeah, it's just over it's 2 years now. Yeah, yeah. And hopefully I'll be just keeping on going like yourself, forever if I can. It might end up being other things that I talk about, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever's gonna like help with your mental health is just do it.
Yeah, exactly. And help me, help others, help everyone. Just having the conversation, right? I think the more we talk about mental health, just in general, just having conversations, making it part of the everyday, that it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's important to take off the lid, so to say.
No, absolutely. The stigma is there, but it's not like how it used to be. And I don't like the older generation still has that stigma, but for my generation and definitely the generation before me, definitely is all about talking about what they're going through or sharing their experiences. So it's definitely we've come a long way in terms of health.
Yeah, getting better. It's definitely getting better. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's good that that governments realize, hey, we actually have a crisis. Let's try to address some of it. So not like how before it's like mental health, like okay, what's that?
I'll just leave that. Yeah, at least like I must say, I forget which prime minister it was in our country, but that his name escapes me, but he really put it on the agenda. And actually I think he was like in our two major parties are Labor and Liberal. And again, we need my husband here to talk about the political stuff because he knows, he follows, and it's an interest of his. So he really follows the American politics as well, as well as Australian. But anyway, I think it was the Liberals who are not known to advocate for mental health. They were the ones that first brought in the mental health care plans and the Medicare rebates, which we do get for our physical health visits, going to see the GP and going into our hospitals and stuff. But that free healthcare, not at the GPs, we do pay a rebate for that, but Medicare covers a bit of it. But the Liberal government did back in 2008 bring in this mental health care plans. So they started, that initiative to really support everyone, all Australians, in some way with their mental health. So it was really good outside of the emergency sort of community services, but privately.
Gotcha. I know you mentioned earlier you don't trust the media, but what have you seen the media? How is America portrayed
Right.
from what you see?
Yeah. Um, I suppose in terms of the health system, because that's where I kind of focus. The message we get is that it's, I want for a better word, but pretty broken. That yeah, so we hear that message, whether that's true or not.
No, it's true to a point, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, pretty broken, and I think that's what. Well, I can only say for myself, that's what makes me feel so grateful for what we have here. And even when I spent a little bit of time in Canada, I mentioned off air, and obviously not in America. I've traveled a little bit in America, but not spent a lot of time there. But like even things like employment, that like base wages. Like I remember working in Canada as a retail assistant. I think I was earning $8 an hour, which I believe back in 2004, which I believe was definitely more than in America. But in Australia back then it was $17 an hour. And I'm just like, how are people supposed to afford healthcare? And what, yeah, and that was back then, like,
Yeah.
or to afford to live. And anyway, so we do hear that, there's certainly a lot of systemic kind of, issues, health, employment, and also, and I haven't like in terms of racism and discrimination and those kind of things too, which we have huge problems here in Australia too, in terms of the gaps that exist, the massive gaps with the care and well-being and everything in the Indigenous community. And I won't pretend to be an expert in that. But yeah, we do hear that huge issues. I mean, even the right with women, with abortions and stuff. So the right to their bodies. Yeah, I've just heard lots of things that basic human rights stuff that I just go, what the? And I know Australia's not perfect, but in America, I just like, it doesn't make me want to, like, I remember my husband saying once that he wouldn't mind moving to America because he did some work in LA for a bit, for the company he works for here in Australia. He did some pre-COVID, some work over in the LA area, and he was just like, oh, ever think about moving here? And I went, nah. I'm like, no, I don't think I could. I mean, the country is, don't get me wrong, landscape wise, people wise, like I've had some beautiful experiences there, but it's the systems I don't think I could live in. Like if I had children, like the education system, the health system, I just don't think I could live in the systems, and basic human rights. That's why I wouldn't move. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question, but that's my perception. I don't know if that's if I'm getting the right end of the stick. And of course our media would sensationalize that if I was watching it, and I probably would hear these catastrophic things, but I do hear things are pretty bad in a lot of those areas. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely all that. Definitely, because I work in a medical setting currently, so yeah, the system is definitely broken, and we have people in government who want to like not expand our Medicaid systems, which could really help so many different things. And I know when we had Trump in office, he tried to cut the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act piece, and that plays a big part of like the stopgap in terms of insurance. So a lot of stuff that like our political party, the Republican Party, likes to cut services that really affect their own supporters, and the supporters don't realize that they by voting for them, they're actually doing more harm to themselves than anything else. So, our Democrats are not that much better either, and but at least they attempts to try to help everybody in terms of services. So it's we
Sounds a bit
we,
like
we need more than we need another party like really bad.
yeah. It's a bit like here in Australia, the Liberal almost sounds like Republican, in terms of their policies and procedures, or what they advocate for. And for me, like I always see the Liberals, I don't vote for them for this reason. I don't even vote for Labor, but Labor sounds like more democratic, where they do try. They're not like they're certainly not perfect. No one is, but they still have a lot to learn. But they try and they're more service driven and providing services for the populace and across all, scopes, like everyone. It's just all about trying to provide those services to support us, including our health. But Liberal tends to be more of the, I know this might be a dramatization, but just making the rich richer, like all about business. Basically, they're more about business and the economy and growing that, which often then sacrifices all the services and support that people need. So yeah, but like you said, I've often said this, we just need another party, because I don't think Liberal, I no longer vote for either of them. We do have other parties, but they're not as strong or as much backing or funding, because these Liberal Labor has all the, people backing them and the money backing them. Yeah. And these poor smaller parties who've got some really great ideas but they don't have the funding behind. Unfortunately, money talks, which sucks.
Yes, unfortunately. Where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, well, the easiest way is on my website, probably. So that's www.burnoutspsychologysupport.com.au. But also I'm on the Instagram and Facebook as well. I'm not on Twitter. I'm a typical Aussie and not on Twitter. I know that seems to be more of I do hear that's very common in America to be on Twitter, but less common in Australia. I might be eventually, but you can basically Burnout Psychology Support on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well these days as well. But that's all on my website anyway. You can find the links, and the links to my podcast as well is there. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, it was fun. It was definitely lovely and educational as well. Like hearing about, I love chatting to certainly people on the pod that are from other places around the world, and you're my only second opportunity. So thank you, Baz, for having me.
No problem. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.